if we can teach the ideals of justice, of equality, of being egalitarian, that's why we started the movement. That's what it was all about. Because again, I'm but a foot soldier in this, representing anyone who has contributed to moving us forward for the good of our patients in the community, not for the good of one individual. So I was born in South Texas. It was a very different time in South Texas in those days, the late 40s, the early 50s. We were all classified as Mexicans, and we weren't treated very well, and that was just a part of life. Discrimination was not only legal and accepted socially, but it was a norm. My mother died when I was 16. We lived in Yuma, Arizona. I had just gotten there. I didn't quite understand that. That was hard, just because she was young and strong. She was 37. I was very fortunate because I left Yuma, Arizona when I finished high school in 1967 and went to San Francisco. I was touched, I always say. I was fortunate to have been a part of that, lucky to have lived through it, and would never want to do it again. But it was an important time. If you think about 67, it wasn't not just a musical revolution in this country, but the civil rights movement was really in full gear. The anti-war movement was just starting to take off into full gear. The women's rights movement was gaining tremendous traction, and all of that was being spearheaded in California. So I took off for a year and went hitchhiking around the country. I left North Carolina hitchhiking in the summer of 1970 and had on my itinerary visiting my sister in Fort Collins, Colorado. She was there working at the university. And so I did. I went there. And it was a profound experience from which I've never recovered, because I basically never left. I basically found myself, I found comfort, I found my niche, I found the movement, I found what I would become a part of in terms of the Chicano movement, and found ways to express myself by being a part of that. I met my wife of almost 45 years on my second day there in Fort Collins, and literally fell in love right away. Those things maybe don't happen that often, but they clearly happened with us, and we've been together ever since. Pamela Maya, who was the head of the Chicano Studies, it wasn't a department, but section of the history department. That was critical, because it was through Abel that I started meeting other Chicano students there and became a part of UMAS, the United Mexican American Students. We were 250 Chicanos maybe, out of a population of 11,500. And we represented a much greater number within the population of the state of Colorado at the time, but again, we weren't given the opportunities for getting in. And so entrance to college became an obvious thing for us to work on. The war in particular was incredibly important to me because of the experience I'd had in California. And indeed, I went on to become a fairly central leader in the anti-war movement at Colorado State University in 71 and 72. It was in spring of 72 that, as part of a national day of manifestation and protest, that a dozen of us or so took over the ROTC building for the Reserve Officer Training Corps. That's what ROTC stood for. And these were mini factories for officers in the university to train them to go off to the war. To, in our opinion, kill more innocent Vietnamese in a war that we thought had no justification whatsoever. So we took that building over that spring. But when we did, we were part of a movement that took over ROTC buildings throughout the country in scores of universities. We were not alone. And I would say that it was that day and that push by 72 that really won the war, because by that time it was very clear to Nixon and the rest of the country that the war could not go on. That was instrumental in my life, because that was a sentinel event in proving to myself that we could do it, that if we made the effort and if we tried, that we could make a difference. We could turn people out. We could turn the clock in a different direction, and social change would become more than words, but could become a reality. Very clearly in the early 70s, late 60s, if you were a young Chicano radical at the university, there was only one thing that was important to us, and that was getting back to your community to be a community organizer and really change the conditions under which we were living and the things that were going on around us. I was offered a job as a community organizer in La Junta in southeastern Colorado at the end of 72, and I jumped at the opportunity. And so one of the first things I did was help to start a co-op, a food co-op. And that was important because it gave some credibility to me and to others that were working on the project in regards to the community and what it was we were trying to do. The next big project that came up that needed to be addressed was that of health services and health care. Now, one needs to understand that this is a really different time in our country's history. This was before a federal law called EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which was passed in the mid-80s. So this is a dozen years before. So in our country, you could still legally be turned away and refuse health services at a hospital if you didn't have money. If you went to the hospital and wanted to get services, you could be refused services if you did not have money, yes. Now that's incredible for most people to appreciate today. It's very hard to understand what that means. But that's what existed in those days, and that's what we faced in those days. When one thinks about the community health center movement in the state of Colorado, you've got to go back a long ways. Keep in mind that Denver Health was the #2 health center in the country. It started in '65. The Salud Family Health Centers, where I've spent many years, was started in 1970. Clinica Campesina and Valleywide were started in '72. And in 1973, I was living in Rocky Ford, and it was there that as a community organizer, I realized that what we needed was to come up with a different system of health care for the Chicano as the community, because we were being excluded from the system of care that existed at that time.
We had to deal with the politics. It was like David and Goliath almost, if not worse at times. No one, I don't think in the community, even people who were lifelong members, thought we would get anywhere with providing health care for those that had historically been underserved. The frustrating part was trying to make that dream, make that vision come true. There was a lot of stumbling blocks, a lot of trial and error. You have to imagine I was 20, 21. Virgilio Licona was, I don't know, 24, 23. And he was an outsider, according to a lot of people. And he wasn't only an outsider, he was a rebel rouser. He was a radical. And no, you don't want to bring those kinds of people here and their ideas and their vision. What kind of vision? So you had to have a commitment to what you were doing in spite of everyone. And that's how the clinic community health center started. And later it even became even more political when the name was changed from Community Health Center to La Clínica del Valle.
Well, at the beginning, it was a real downer, negative ideas about it. They didn't think it was gonna amount to anything. They didn't think it was gonna amount to anything. Me as a board member, now I look back at it and I'm just thrilled that I was a part of something big that happened. It was just a little thought of somebody's thought, and here it is. It's over the Tri-County, and they're writing good articles about him. It's just amazing. And it's the people that started it.